crash. A bullet grazes Nick Buckley's son had as waves pound the cliffs of St. Loup. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, smells murder in the salty air. Is it coincidence, or is someone stalking the spirited mistress of Endhouse? A crumbling mansion hides secret cocaine, betrayal, a shadowy figure on the cliff. Who wants Nick dead? Why now? Step into a web of deception where every friend could be a foe, and Poirot's grey cells race to unmask a killer before the next shot strikes. True. Chapter 1. The cliffside encounter. The Cornish sun hung high over St. Loup, a golden orb casting its benevolence across the rugged cliffs that fringed the sea. The air was alive with the tang of salt and the cry of gulls, a symphony of summer that danced along the narrow paths winding through heather and gorse. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive detective, whose fame preceded him like a shadow, strolled with measured steps, his cream linen suit pristine despite the sea breeze tugging at its edges. His black patent leather shoes, polished to a mirror gleam, clicked softly against the stone path, and his moustache, waxed to razor-sharp points, quivered with the satisfaction of a man ostensibly on holiday. Yet Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, betrayed no true repose. His little grey cells, as he fondly called them, were ever alert, seeking order in the chaos of the world. St. Loup, a quaint seaside resort nestled between jagged cliffs and azure waves, had lured Poirot with promises of tranquility. He had arrived 3 days prior, seeking respite from the whirl of London's intrigues and the demands of clients who saw in him a near mythical solver of puzzles. The Grand Hotel, with its whitewashed facade and geranium-laden balconies, had provided comfort, but Poirot found himself drawn to the cliffs, where the raw beauty of nature stirred his soul. It was here, on this sun-dappled path, overlooking the restless sea, that fate, ever the dramatist, chose to unveil a new mystery. The path curved sharply, revealing Endhouse, a sprawling mansion perched precariously on the cliff's edge. Its weathered stone walls, streaked with salt and time, spoke of grandeur, faded but not forgotten. Ivy clung to its turrets, and its tall windows glinted like eyes watching the sea. Poirot paused, his cane tapping the ground, as a figure emerged. From the garden gate a young woman, no more than 25, whose vitality seemed to rival the sun itself. She wore a simple white dress, its hem fluttering in the breeze, and a wide-brimmed sun hat adorned with a scarlet ribbon. Her dark hair, cropped fashionably short, framed a face of striking beauty, with eyes that sparkled like the sea below. Yet there was a shadow in those eyes, a fleeting unease that Poirot's keen gaze did not miss. "Bonjour, mademoiselle," Poirot said, lifting his hat with a flourish. "A fine day for a walk, is it not?" The woman started, as if pulled from a reverie, then flashed a smile that was both disarming and guarded. "Oh yes, marvelous. I didn't see you there. You must be the famous Monsieur Poirot, I heard. You were in St. Loup." Her voice was light, with a trace of a Cornish lilt, but it carried an undercurrent of tension. Poirot bowed slightly, his moustache twitching with amusement. "The fame, it precedes me, alas. And you, mademoiselle, are Nick Buckley," she replied, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, but her fingers trembled faintly. "I live here, at Endhouse. It's a bit of a wreck, but it's home." Poirot's eyes flickered to the mansion, noting its air of neglect, the sagging shutters, the overgrown roses spilling over the garden wall. "A home with character," he remarked. "And you, Mademoiselle Buckley, are its spirited mistress." Nick laughed, a sound like breaking glass, bright but brittle. "Spirited, yes, that's kinder than most would say. Would you like to see the garden? It's the only part of Endhouse that doesn't threaten to collapse." Poirot accepted, intrigued by her candor and the shadow in her gaze. They passed through the gate into a wild garden, where lavender and thyme mingled with sea pinks, their scents heady in the warm air. A stone path led to a terrace overlooking the cliff, where the sea churned 100 feet below, its waves crashing against jagged rocks. Nick leaned against the low wall, her hat shielding her eyes as she stared out at the horizon. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, "but it's dangerous too. The cliffs crumble, the sea takes what it wants. Sometimes I think Endhouse is cursed." Poirot's brows lifted. "Cursed, mademoiselle. A strong word. Is there a story behind it?" Nick hesitated, her fingers twisting the ribbon on her hat. "Oh, just local gossip. They say the Buckleys have always had bad luck, shipwrecks, debts, tragedies. I don't believe it, of course, but her voice trailed off, and she shook her head, forcing a smile. Never mind, I'm being silly. Poirot studied her, his mind cataloguing her words, her gestures, the flicker of fear she tried to hide. Before he could probe further, a sharp crack split the air, like a whip snapping. Nick gasped, stumbling backward, and her hat flew from her head, tumbling over the cliff. Poirot's reflexes, honed by years of instinct, propelled him forward, seizing her arm to steady her. "Mademoiselle, are you hurt?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. Nick's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. I don't know. What was that?" Poirot's gaze swept the terrace, then the cliff path beyond. The garden was empty, the sea's roar the only sound. He knelt, retrieving a small object glinting in the grass, a spent bullet, its casing warm to the touch. His heart quickened, but his expression remained serene as he rose, holding the bullet between gloved fingers. "A curious thing, mademoiselle," he said, his tone deceptively mild. "This appears to be a bullet, and it has, I think, just missed you." Nick's hand flew to her mouth, her breath hitching. "A bullet? That's impossible. It must have been a rock, or something." Poirot's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "Nan, mademoiselle, a rock does not leave such a mark." He gestured to her hat, now caught on a gorse bush, near the cliff's edge. Retrieving it, he pointed to a neat hole pierced through the brim, the fabric singed. "This was no accident. Someone, I fear, has tried to harm you." Nick stared at the hat, her bravado crumbling. "But why? I haven't any enemies. It doesn't make sense." Poirot pocketed the bullet, his mind racing. "Sense, mademoiselle, is what I shall find. Tell me, who else is at End House? Who knows you walk this path?" Nick swallowed, her voice unsteady. "Just the household, Ellen, my housekeeper, and her husband, George, the gardener. My cousin, Charles Vyse, he's a lawyer in town, visits often. And Freddie Rice, my friend, she's staying with me. Oh, and Jim Lazarus, an artist, he's been sketching the cliffs. But they're my people." Poirot noted the hesitation, the way her eyes darted toward the house. "Your people, yes, but even those closest to us can hide secrets. Come, let us return to End House. I wish to meet these friends of yours." They retraced their steps, Nick clutching her ruined hat, her earlier lightness replaced by a quiet dread. Poirot's mind was a whirl of questions. A bullet implied intent, precision a killer with a motive. Was Nick's curse more than superstition? And why target her on this open cliff, where escape was easy but detection risked? End House's front door creaked as Nick pushed it open, revealing a grand hall with faded tapestries and a sweeping staircase. The air was cool, scented with beeswax and salt. A woman in her 50s, wiry and stern, emerged from a side door, her apron dusted with flour. "Miss Nick, you're back early," she said, her Cornish accent thick. Her eyes flicked to Poirot, narrowing slightly. "And who's this?" "Ellen, this is Monsieur Poirot," Nick said, her voice steadier now. "He's visiting." "Monsieur Poirot, Ellen Wilson, my housekeeper. She keeps End House from falling apart." Poirot bowed, his resolve firm. "Fear, mademoiselle, is the enemy's weapon. We shall disarm it together." The morning unfolded with Poirot's methodical inquiries. He began with Ellen, finding her in the kitchen, kneading dough with fierce precision. Her face was a mask, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot questioned her about the previous day. "I was in the pantry, sir," she said, her voice flat. "Didn't hear no shot. Miss Nick's always wandering those cliffs foolish, if you ask me." Poirot's smile was gentle, probing. "And this star of the sea, Madame Wilson, you know of it?" Ellen's hands stilled, flour dusting the air. "Old tales, sir. My gran used to say it brought bad luck. Best left buried, if it even exists." Poirot noted her deflection, filing it away. He moved to the garden, where George, Ellen's husband, was pruning roses, his weathered face impassive. George claimed to have been at the far end of the estate, repairing a fence, and saw no strangers. His answers were curt, his eyes avoiding Poirot's, suggesting loyalty or fear. Charles arrived at noon, his motorcar kicking up dust. His manner was brusque, his concern for Nick tinged with irritation. "Monsieur Poirot, this bullet business is nonsense. Nick's careless, always has been. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his voice soft but firm. "A bullet, monsieur, is no molehill. Tell me, you are close to Mademoiselle Buckley, her heir, perhaps?" Charles's face reddened. "Her heir? That's private, sir. I'm her cousin, her advisor. I look out for her, that's all." Poirot's smile was serene, but his mind was sharp. Charles's defensiveness hinted at motive inheritance, perhaps, or control of Endhouse. He thanked him, moving to Freddie, who sat on the terrace, a cigarette smouldering between her fingers. Freddie's beauty was fragile, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "Nix, my dearest friend," she said, her voice low, "but she's reckless. Those cliffs, that house, it's all falling apart. Like her luck." Poirot's gaze was steady. "And you, Madame Rice, you have seen nothing unusual? No strangers, no threats?" Freddie's hand trembled, ash falling to the stone. "No, nothing. Just, I worry for her. She doesn't deserve this." Poirot noted her nerves, her evasiveness. Each suspect was a thread, woven into a tapestry of secrets. Lunch was a tense affair, served in the dining room, its chandelier casting prisms across the table. Nick, Charles, Freddie, Lazarus, and Ellen sat in uneasy silence. Poirot's presence a catalyst for their discomfort. As coffee was served, Poirot addressed the group, his voice clear and commanding. "Mies Amos, a crime has been attempted at Endhouse. Mademoiselle Buckley is in danger, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover the truth. I ask for your cooperation, your honesty. Someone here knows more than they say." The room was still. The seas roared distant. Charles's jaw tightened. Freddie's cup clattered. Lazarus's eyes darted to Nick. Ellen, clearing plates, paused, her face unreadable. Nick forced a laugh, breaking the tension. "Monsieur Poirot, you're scaring them. Let's not turn this into a melodrama." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Melodrama, mademoiselle, is life's way of revealing truth. I shall return tomorrow, and we shall see what the tide brings." As Poirot left Endhouse, the sun was setting, painting the cliffs in hues of amber and rose. He walked slowly, his cane tapping, his mind a whirl of clues. The bullet, the note, the cigarette end, Nick's fear, the suspect's secrets. At the hotel, he found a telegram from Hastings, confirming his arrival the next day. Poirot smiled, anticipating his friend's arrival, but his thoughts were on Endhouse. In his room, he spread his clues on the desk. The bullet, the note, the cigarette end. The bullet was a .22 caliber, common but precise. The note's scrawl suggested haste or disguise. The cigarette's crest was unfamiliar, but a jeweler in town might recognize it. He resolved to investigate the Star of the Sea, sensing it held a key to the motive dot. As he gazed out at the sea, its waves glinting under the moon, Poirot felt a thrill of anticipation. The cliffside encounter had been no accident. It was the opening act of a deadly play, and he was its director. Nick Buckley's life hung in the balance, and Hercule Poirot would not fail her. The mystery of Endhouse had begun, and its secrets would soon be his. Ellen's lips thinned, but she nodded. "Pleasure, sir. Tea's in the drawing-room if you're wanting it." "Merci, Madame Wilson," Poirot said, his smile disarming. "I should like that very much." As Ellen retreated, Nick led Poirot to the drawing-room, a spacious chamber with tall windows overlooking the sea. The furniture was elegant but worn, the velvet chairs fraying at the edges. Two figures rose as they entered, a man in his 30s, tall and handsome with a lawyer's polished air, and a woman of striking beauty, her blonde hair swept into a chignon, her silk dress clinging to her frame. "Charles, Freddie, this is Hercule Poirot," Nick said, her tone bright but forced. "He's a detective, of all things. Monsieur Poirot, my cousin Charles Vyse, and my friend Freddie Rice." Charles extended a hand, his grip firm, his blue eyes assessing. "A detective. St. Lou's an odd place for sleuthing. Monsieur what brings you here?" "A holiday," Monsieur Vyse Poirot replied, his voice smooth. "But I find the unexpected often follows me. Mademoiselle Buckley has had a mishap on the cliff." Freddie's eyes widened, her hand pausing mid-gesture, with a cigarette. "A mishap? Nick, what happened?" Nick hesitated, glancing at Poirot, who gave a slight nod. "Someone shot at me," she said, her voice flat. "Or at least, a bullet hit my hat. Monsieur Poirot found it." Charles's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "Shot at you? That's absurd. Are you sure it wasn't hunters, or a stray?" "Shot from the bay." Poirot produced the bullet, holding it up to the light. "A stray shot, monsieur, does not pierce a hat so precisely." This was aimed with intent. Freddie gasped, her cigarette falling to the rug, where she quickly stamped it out. "Nick, darling, you must go to the police. This is serious." Nick shook her head, sinking into a chair. "The police? They'll think I'm mad. Besides, I don't know who'd want me dead. It's probably a mistake." Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting Charles's clenched fists, Freddie's trembling hands, and Ellen, who lingered in the doorway, her face unreadable. "A mistake, mademoiselle, is possible. But I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in coincidences. I shall stay in St. Loup a little longer, if you permit, to ensure your safety." Charles frowned, his voice clipped. "That's kind, Monsieur Poirot, but Nick's family can handle this. I'll speak to the constable myself." Poirot's smile was polite but firm. "And yet, monsieur, a fresh pair of eyes may see what familiarity obscures. I insist." Nick looked up, her eyes meeting Poirot's, a spark of gratitude amidst her fear. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I'd feel safer with you here." The tension in the room was palpable, a silent current, running between the four occupants. Ellen broke it, stepping forward with a tray of tea. "Tea, sir?" she asked Poirot, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "Merci," Poirot said, accepting a cup. As he sipped, his mind catalogued the scene. Nick's fear, Charles's protectiveness, Freddie's nerves, Elon's reserve. Each was a piece of a puzzle, and the bullet was its first clue. The afternoon waned, the sun dipping toward the sea, casting long shadows across the drawing room. Poirot excused himself, promising to return the next day, and made his way back to the Grand Hotel. The cliff path was quiet now, the gulls circling lazily above. He paused at the spot where the bullet had struck, his eyes scanning the terrain. The shooter had a clear line of sight, but the gorse and rocks offered cover. A professional, perhaps, or an amateur with nerve. At the hotel, Poirot penned a telegram to Captain Hastings, his loyal friend, urging him to join him in St. Loup. Hastings's bluff honesty would balance Poirot's precision, and two minds were better than one. As he sealed the envelope, a knock sounded at his door. The hotel porter handed him a note, its paper cheap and unadorned. "Monsieur Poirot," it read in a scrawled hand, "leave St. Loup or share her fate." Poirot's moustache twitched, a gleam of excitement in his eyes. The threat confirmed his suspicions. Nick Buckley was in grave danger, and someone feared his interference. He tucked the note into his pocket, resolving to visit Endhouse at dawn. The mystery had begun, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until its secrets were laid bare. The next morning, Poirot rose early, the sea a silver mirror under a pale sky. He donned a fresh suit, his cane in hand, and set out for Endhouse, the bullet and note weighing heavily in his mind. The cliff path was deserted, save for a fisherman hauling nets far below. As he neared the mansion, a figure emerged from the garden. Nick, her face pale but resolute, a shawl draped over her shoulders. "Monsieur Poirot," she called, her voice carrying over the wind. "I didn't expect you so soon." "I am a man of promptness, mademoiselle," he replied, tipping his hat, "and I have questions that cannot wait. Tell me, have you enemies, debts, secrets that might provoke such an attack?" Nick's eyes flickered, her fingers tightening on the shawl. "Enemies, no. Debts. Well, Endhouse isn't cheap, but I manage. Secrets," she laughed, a hollow sound. "Who doesn't have a few?" Poirot's gaze was steady, probing. "And the Star of the Sea? I heard mention of it in Towner Buckley heirloom." "Yes." Nick's face froze, her breath catching. "How did it—" "It's just a story. A sapphire my great-grandfather supposedly hid. No one's seen it in years." "Why?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Stories, mademoiselle, often hide truths. Come, let us walk. I wish to see where the bullet was fired." They retraced the path to the terrace, Poirot's eyes scanning the ground. He noted a scuff mark in the dirt, a broken gorse branch, signs of a hasty retreat. Kneeling, he found a cigarette end, its paper embossed with a faint crest. He slipped it into an envelope, his mind turning to the suspects. Charles, a smoker, had been evasive. Freddie's cigarettes were plain. Ellen, unlikely but possible. The crest suggested wealth, perhaps a clue to the shooter's identity. As they returned to the house, a motorcar roared up the drive, disgorging a young man in a tweed jacket, his hair tousled, a sketchbook under his arm. "Nick," he called, his voice rich with concern. "I heard about yesterday. Are you all right?" "Jim Lazarus," Nick said, introducing him to Poirot. "He's an artist, practically lives on the cliffs. Jim, this is Monsieur Poirot, a detective. Lazarus's handshake was firm, his brown eyes wary. A detective. Bit dramatic for St. Loup, isn't it? Poirot's smile was disarming. Drama, monsieur, finds me. You were on the cliffs yesterday. Perhaps. You saw nothing unusual. Lazarus shook his head. Too quickly, Poirot thought. No, I was sketching in town. Nick, you should be careful. These cliffs are treacherous. Nick's smile was strained. So everyone keeps telling me. Poirot noted Lazarus's unease, the way his fingers gripped the sketchbook. Another piece of the puzzle, perhaps a significant one. As Lazarus excused himself, promising to return for lunch, Poirot turned to Nick. Mademoiselle, I urge you to stay indoors today. I shall speak to your friends, your household. Someone knows more than they say. Nick nodded, her eyes haunted. I trust you, Monsieur Poirot. Just don't let them think I'm scared. Chapter 2. The Secrets of End House. The morning sun cast a golden sheen over St. Loup, its rays dancing on the waves that lapped against the jagged cliffs below the majestic hotel. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a cream linen suit, stood on the hotel's terrace, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the seaside town. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings sipped tea, his eyes drifting to the distant silhouette of End House, perched like a weary sentinel on the cliff's edge. The previous evening's gunshots still echoed in their minds, a bullet that had grazed Nick Buckley's sun hat, turning their holiday into a puzzle that Poirot's little grey cells were already itching to solve. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice crisp as the sea breeze. The incident with Mademoiselle Nick was no mere accident. 3 near-fatal mishaps in as many days, and now a bullet. Nen, this is a pattern, a tapestry of malice woven with care. Hastings set down his cup, frowning. Come now, Poirot, you're seeing conspiracies where there's only bad luck. A car's brakes fail. A boulder tumbles, a painting falls, coincidences surely, and the shot. Perhaps a hunter strayed too close to the cliffs. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with amusement. A hunter, Hastings, in a seaside resort, aiming at a lady's hat. Nan, you lack the imagination for crime. We must visit this end house and meet the players in this drama. Only then will the threads of motive begin to unravel. After breakfast, they set out. Along the winding coastal path, the air thick with salt, and the cries of gulls, End House loomed ahead, its weathered stone facade sagging under the weight of time. Ivy clung to its walls like a desperate lover, and the windows stared blankly. At the sea, the garden, overgrown with wild roses and brambles, whispered of neglect. Yet there was a strange beauty in its decay, as if the house itself held secrets it refused to yield. Nick Buckley greeted them at the door, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her smile as bright as it was fleeting. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, you've come to inspect my crumbling kingdom, have you? She said, her voice teasing but tinged with a nervous edge. She wore a sea-green dress that swayed as she led them inside, her bare feet brushing. The worn floorboards dot the drawing room was a study in faded grandeur, threadbare velvet curtains, a chipped chandelier, and a grand piano draped in dust. Nick gestured to a mismatched collection of chairs. Make yourselves at home, my friends. Should be here soon. They're an odd bunch, but they keep life interesting. As they settled, Poirot's eyes roamed the room, noting a photograph of a young man in aviator goggles, a tarnished silver cigarette case, and a stack of unpaid bills peeking from a drawer. Mademoiselle, he began, you spoke last night of accidents. Tell me, who knew of these incidents? Nick perched on the piano stool, her fingers tracing invisible notes. Oh, everyone, I suppose. I mentioned the car brakes to Fredesh. She's my best friend. You'll meet her. The boulder, I told Jim, he's an art dealer who's always sniffing around for a bargain. And the painting, well, Charles, my cousin, was here when it crashed down. He's a lawyer, terribly proper. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. And this Michael Seaton, the aviator in the photograph, where is he now? Nick's smile faltered, her gaze drifting to the window. Michael's away, flying around the world, or so he says. We're engaged, but it's a secret. He's rather famous, you see, and I don't want the papers hounding me. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. Engaged? That's splendid news. Why the secrecy? Nick hesitated, then laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh, you know how it is. Family drama, nosy reporters. Besides, Michael's got enemies, people jealous of his success. I'd rather keep it quiet until he's back. Before could probe further, the door burst open, and a woman swept in, her platinum blonde hair shimmering like a halo. She wore a silk kimono that slipped off one shoulder, revealing a delicate collarbone. "Nick, darling, you didn't tell me we had guests," she exclaimed, her voice husky with a practiced charm. "I'm Freddie Rice." "Charmed, I'm sure." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Madame Rice, a pleasure. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings." Freddie's eyes flicked over them, lingering on Hastings with a playful smirk. "A detective and a soldier. My, Nick, you do collect interesting men." Hastings blushed, fumbling with his tie, while Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Moments later, Jim Lazarus sauntered in, his dark hair slicked back, his suit tailored to perfection. He carried an air of easy confidence, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Poirot, is it? Heard of you. Nick says you're poking into her little accidents. Waste of time, if you ask me." "And you, Monsieur Lazarus, what brings you to End House?" Poirot asked, his tone mild but probing. Jim grinned, lighting a cigarette. "Art, my friend. Nick's got a few old paintings in this pile that might be worth a fortune. I'm helping her sort them out." "Helping, or helping yourself?" The voice came from the doorway, where Charles Vyse stood, his spectacles glinting. In the dim light, he was tall, angular, his suit as stiff as his demeanor. "Nick, you really must stop letting strangers rummage through your things." Nick rolled her eyes. "Charles, don't be such a bore. Jim's harmless, and Freddie keeps me sane. Besides, you're always fussing about the estate. Maybe I'll sell it all and run off to Monte Carlo." The room crackled with tension, each guest eyeing the others like players in a high-stakes game. Poirot observed silently, his mind cataloguing every glance, every inflection. Freddie lit a cigarette, her hands trembling slightly. Jim leaned against the mantel, his smile too wide. Charles adjusted his cuffs, his lips a thin line. "Mademoiselle." "Nick," Poirot said, breaking the silence, "may we see the room where the painting fell? It may hold clues to your ... misfortunes." Nick led them upstairs, her bare feet silent on the creaking stairs. The bedroom was sparsely furnished, with a four-poster bed and a cracked mirror. On the floor lay the remnants of a heavy oil painting, its frame splintered, the canvas depicting a stormy sea. Poirot knelt, examining the wall where the painting had hung. A faint scratch marked the plaster, as if the wire had been tampered with. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "The wire is strong, yet it snapped. And this scratch made by a knife." Perhaps Nick shivered. "It fell in the middle of the night. I was asleep, thank heavens, or I'd be flatter than a crepe." Hastings chuckled, but Poirot's expression darkened. "This was no accident. Mademoiselle, someone wished you harm." As they returned downstairs, Freddie was pouring gin from a crystal decanter, her laughter brittle. "Honestly, Nick, you're making a fuss over nothing. Paintings fall, breaks fail. You're not cursed, are you?" "So sure, Madame Rice?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but piercing. "Or do you know more than you say?" Freddie's glass paused mid-air, her eyes narrowing. Before she could reply, Jim interrupted, gesturing to a small table. "Hey, Nick, what's this?" He held up a folded note, its edges yellowed, tucked beneath a vase. Nick frowned, taking it. "I've never seen this before." She unfolded it, her face paling as she read aloud. "Beware the tides that hide the truth. End House keeps its secrets well." The room fell silent, the words hanging like a storm cloud. Poirot took the note, his fingers tracing the spidery script. "This was placed here recently," he said. "The ink is fresh, the paper uncreased. Someone in this house knows more than they admit." Charles cleared his throat. "This is nonsense. Probably a prank by one of Nick's bohemian friends." "Or a warning," Poirot countered, his gaze sweeping the room. "Tell me, who has access to End House?" Nick shrugged. "Everyone, really. The doors are never locked. Friends come and go. Freddie, Jim, Charles, even the gardener, old Croker." As Poirot questioned them further, probing their alibis and connections, the atmosphere grew taut. Freddie admitted to staying at End House often, her own flat in town too dreary. Jim claimed he was in London when the boulder fell, but his evasive tone raised Poirot's suspicions. Charles insisted he was only protecting Nick's interests, yet his cold demeanor suggested more. The afternoon waned, and the group moved to the terrace for tea, the sea sparkling below. Hastings, ever the gentleman, engaged Freddie in conversation. charmed by her wit despite Poirot's whispered warning, "Beware, mon ami." The scorpion hides its sting behind a smile. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Poirot noticed a figure in the gardener groundskeeper, perhaps moving among the roses. But something about the figure's gait, furtive and deliberate, set his nerves on edge. He excused himself, intending to investigate, when a blood-curdling scream tore through the air. Coming from the direction of the garden, Hastings leaped to his feet, his tea spilling. Good Lord, what was that? Nick's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. Freddie froze, her cigarette dropping to the stone. Jim and Charles exchanged a glance, their faces unreadable. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos, calm, but commanding. "Stay here, all of you. Hastings, with me." He strode toward the garden, his cane tapping the path, as the scream's echo lingered like a ghost in the twilight. Chapter 3. The ghost of a motive. The sea air clung to Hercule Poirot's neatly pressed coat as he and Captain Hastings descended the winding path from the cliffs of St. Lou, the Cornish sun casting long shadows over the jagged rocks below. End house loomed behind them, its weathered stone facade a silent witness to the near-fatal bullet that had grazed Nick Buckley's sun hat just the day before. Poirot's small, precise steps contrasted with Hastings' longer strides, his friend's face etched with unease. "I say, Poirot," Hastings ventured, adjusting his straw hat against the breeze, "do you really think someone's out to murder that poor girl? 3 accidents in 3 days, now a bullet. It's dashed peculiar, isn't it?" Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, flicked toward the horizon. "Peculiar, mon ami. Nan, it is not peculiar. It is deliberate. The bullet in Mademoiselle Nick's hatchet speaks of intention, of malice. The question is not if someone wishes her dead, but why." His voice, soft yet resolute, carried the weight of certainty. They reached the majestic hotel, its whitewashed walls gleaming under the midday sun. The lobby bustled with summer visitors, ladies in wide-brimmed hats sipping tea, gentlemen discussing yacht races, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere, sifting through the fragments of Nick Buckley's tale. A car with failed brakes, a boulder tumbling from the cliffs, a painting crashing from its hook, and now, a bullet. Coincidence, he had told Hastings, was a lazy man's excuse for truth. "Let us begin." "Hastings," Poirot said, settling into a wicker chair in the hotel's tea room, "we must uncover the why, the motive. It is the heart of the crime, and for that, we must know Mademoiselle Nick, not as she is now, but as she was, and who surrounds her." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "She's a charming girl, full of life. Hard to imagine anyone wanting to harm her. Perhaps it's a jilted lover, or some financial grudge." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is deeper, rooted in the past. The house, End House, it holds secrets, I am certain. We shall start with the family, the history. Every crime has its ghost, Hastings, and I intend to find this one." Their first stop was the St. Lou Public Library, a quaint stone building nestled between a bakery and a chemist's shop. The librarian, Miss Tuttle, a wiry woman with spectacles perched on her nose, greeted them with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "You're that detective fellow, aren't you?" she said, peering at Poirot. "Heard you were sniffing around End House. What's your business here?" Poirot offered a disarming smile. "Mademoiselle, I seek only knowledge, the history of End House and its family, the Buckleys. Old records, perhaps, or local tales." Miss Tuttle's eyes narrowed, but she led them to a dusty archive room, its shelves groaning with leather-bound ledgers and yellowed newspapers. "The Buckleys have been at End House for generations," she said, pulling a volume from 1890. "Old Sir Nicholas was a naval man, made his fortune in trade. But the family's had its share of troubles, debts, scandals, you name it." Poor fingers danced over the pages, pausing at a faded photograph of End House in its prime, its gardens lush and its windows gleaming. "And Mademoiselle Nick's parents?" he asked. "Dead, both of them," Miss Tuttle replied. "Her father, Philip Buckley, was a reckless sort, gambled away much of the family's wealth. Died in a boating accident 10 years ago. Her mother passed soon after, heart trouble, they say. Nick inherited End House, but it's been falling apart ever since." Hastings leaned forward. "Any enemies? Someone who might hold a grudge against the family?" Miss Tuttle hesitated, her voice dropping. "There was talk, years back, about a scandal. An aviator, Michael Seaton was sweet on Nick's aunt, Clara Buckley. He was famous, flew solo across the Atlantic, but he died in a crash, and some said the Buckleys were to blame, something about a debt or a betrayal. Folk here don't forget that sort of thing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. This Michael Seaton is death. It was investigated. Miss Tuttle shrugged. Not much to investigate. Plane went down in a storm off the coast. Body never found, just wreckage. But the gossip lingered. Some said Clara broke his heart, others that Philip owed him money. Either way, it's a ghost. That still haunts Endhouse. As they left the library, Poirot's mind churned. A dead aviator, a family scandal, a crumbling estate, pieces of a puzzle, but none yet fit. We must speak to those who knew the Buckleys then, he told Hastings. The past, it is whispering to us, and we must listen. Their next destination was the Rusty Anchor, a weathered pub overlooking the harbour, where fishermen and old-timers gathered. The air was thick with the scent of salt and ale, and the barman, a grizzled man named Tom Pengley, eyed them warily. "You're after Buckley gossip, eh?" he said, wiping a glass. "Plenty of that around, but it'll cost you a pint." Hastings obliged, and soon Pengley was talking. Philip Buckley was a charmer, but a fool with money, always borrowing, never paying back. That aviator Seaton was mixed up with him, loaned him a fortune for some madcap venture. When Seaton died, folks said Philip had something to do with it. Sabotage, maybe, to dodge the debt. Poirot's brow arched. Sabotage, a serious accusation. Monsieur Pengley leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "No proof, mind you, but Seaton's plane was serviced here in St. Louis before his last flight. Mechanics swore it was sound, but it went down all the same. And Philip Buckley was seen at the airfield that night, drunk as a lord." Hastings gasped. "You don't mean "I'm not saying nothing," Pengley replied, "but Endhouse has a shadow over it. Always has." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. A young woman, her face pale, burst into the pub. "It's Nick Buckley," she cried. "She's had another accident. Her car nearly went off the cliff road." Poirot and Hastings raced to the scene, a narrow road winding along the cliffs. Nick stood beside her battered green roadster, its front wheel inches from the edge. Her face was ashen, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "I'm fine," she snapped, brushing off a concerned bystander. "Just a skid, that's all." Poirot examined the car, his gloved fingers tracing the steering column. "A skid, mademoiselle, or perhaps something more deliberate." He pointed to a faint cut in the brake line, barely visible. "This is no accident." Nick's bravado faltered. "You think someone's really after me, don't you?" "I do not think, mademoiselle. I know." Back at the Majestic, Poirot paced the tea room, his mind a whirlwind of clues. The aviator's death, the Buckley debts, the cut brake line, it all pointed to a motive buried in the past. "We must find someone who knew Michael Seaton," he told Hastings. "Someone who can confirm this scandal, this debt. And we must watch Mademoiselle Nick closely. The killer grows impatient." Their next lead came unexpectedly. At dinner, a waiter slipped Poirot a note. "Meet me at the old lighthouse. Midnight. I know about Seaton." It was unsigned, the handwriting shaky. Hastings urged caution, but curiosity was piqued. "The truth, mon ami. It hides in the shadows. We must go." The old lighthouse stood on a rocky promontory, its beacon long extinguished. The night was moonless, the only sound the crash of waves below. As they approached, a figure emerged from the darkness, a woman, elderly and frail, wrapped in a shawl. "You're the detective," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Ellen, used to be housekeeper at Endhouse. I heard you're asking about Michael Seaton." Poirot nodded. "Speak, madame. What do you know?" Ellen's eyes darted nervously. "It was 20 years ago. Michael was in love with Clara Buckley, Nick's aunt. He was rich, famous, but she broke it off. Said she couldn't leave Endhouse. Michael was heartbroken, took to flying recklessly. The night he died, I saw Philip Buckley arguing with him at the airfield. Michael shouted something about money, said Philip would regret crossing him, and the crash." Poirot pressed. Ellen hesitated. "I don't know. But after, Philip was different, guilty-like. And Clara, she never recovered. Died a year later, some say of grief." Before Poirot could ask more, a rustling came from the bushes. Ellen gasped and fled into the night. Poirot and Hastings spun around, but the darkness revealed nothing. They returned to the hotel, unsettled. the weight of Ellen's words lingering. The next morning, Poirot summoned Nick to the hotel. "Mademoiselle, you must tell me everything about your family, your father, your aunt, this Michael Seaton, the truth. It is your shield." Nick fidgeted. Her usual spark dimmed. "I was a child when it happened. Father never talked about Seaton, but I remember the whispers. People said he owed Michael money, that the crash wasn't an accident. I thought it was just gossip." "And your Aunt Clara?" Poirot asked. "She was sad, always. I think she loved Michael, but something tore them apart. Father said it was for the best." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this debt, do you know who inherited it, or who might still bear a grudge?" Nick shook her head. "Father's debts died with him. Endhouse is all I have, and it's barely worth keeping." As she left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "That motive, it is there, in the shadow of this aviator's death, a debt unpaid, a love betrayed, a secret buried. We must dig deeper." That afternoon, they visited the airfield where Seaton's plane had been serviced. The manager, a grizzled man, named Harris, remembered the incident vividly. "Seaton was a daredevil," he said, leading them to a hangar filled with old photographs. "His plane was a beauty, checked top to bottom, but storms are unpredictable. If there was foul play, it wasn't from my crew." Poirot studied a photo of Seaton, a handsome man with a reckless grin, standing beside a sleek biplane. "And Philip Buckley was here that night." Harris nodded reluctantly. "Aye, drunk and ranting. Kept saying Seaton would ruin him, but he left before the flight. Far as I know." Back in St. Louis, the town buzzed with news of Nick's latest accident. Poirot overheard a group of locals at the market, their voices low. "It's the curse of Endhouse," one said. "First Clara, now Nick. That place is bad luck." Poirot dismissed superstition but noted the fear in their eyes. The town's memory was long, and Seaton's ghost loomed large. He decided to revisit Endhouse, hoping its walls might yield more clues. As they approached, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in an eerie glow. The gates creaked, and Hastings froze. "Poirot, look," he whispered, pointing to a shadowy figure slipping through the garden. The figure paused, as if sensing their presence, then vanished into the night. Poirot's heart quickened. "The ghost of the motive, perhaps," he murmured, "or the killer himself. We are close, Hastings, very close." Chapter 4. The Australian Enigma. The sun hung low over St. Louis, painting the cliffs in hues of amber and rose, as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings strolled along the winding path from Endhouse to the village. The sea breeze carried a temps of salt and seaweed, mingling with the faint scent of jasmine from the overgrown gardens that flanked the trail. Poirot's polished shoes clicked rhythmically on the gravel, his cane tapping a counterpoint, while Hastings, ever the enthusiast for fresh air, inhaled deeply, his eyes tracing the horizon where gulls wheeled against the sky. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his hat against the breeze. "This seaside air, it is invigorating, weak, but it does not clear the fog from the mind. The incidents at Endhouse, 3 accidents, a bullet in Mademoiselle Nick's hat, these are not the caprices of fate. No, they are the threads of a tapestry, and we must find the pattern." Hastings nodded, though his thoughts lingered on. The charming Nick Buckley, her laughter as bright as the Cornish sun. "Do you really think someone's trying to kill her, Poirot? It seems so improbable. She's so young, so full of life." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Improbable, Hastings. The improbable is the domain of the criminal mind. The bullet was no bee, and the accidents, they are too precise, too deliberate. We must learn more of Mademoiselle Nick's world, her friends, her enemies, and today we shall meet two who intrigue me greatly." They approached a quaint cottage nestled at the foot of the cliff, its whitewashed walls glowing in the evening light. A sign reading Cliffside Haven hung above the door, and the garden bloomed with exotic flowers that seemed out of place in Cornwall's rugged landscape. This was the temporary home of Mr. and Mrs. Croft, the Australian couple renting the property from Nick's estate. Poirot had learned of them from Nick's offhand mention, a pair of jovial travellers who had taken a liking to Endhouse's mistress. But Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unravelling human deceit, whispered of something amiss. The door swung open before Poirot could knock, revealing Mrs. Ellen Croft, a woman of robust build with a shock of auburn hair pinned haphazardly atop her head. Her smile was wide, almost theatrical, and her voice boomed with an Australian twang. "Well, strike me lucky. "You must be Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings. Nick said you'd drop by. Come in, don't stand there like a pair of glass in the sun." Hastings blinked, charmed by her exuberance, but Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the woman's quick gestures and the way her gaze darted to the path behind them, as if expecting someone else. They stepped into a parlor cluttered with curious carved wooden boomerangs, a didgeridoo leaning against a wall, and a framed photograph of a rugged outback landscape. The air smelled of eucalyptus and freshly baked scones, an odd but welcoming combination. "Sit yourselves down," Mrs. Croft said, bustling to a tray laden with tea and scones. "Bert's out back, fussing with his roses. Thinks he's a proper English gardener now, bless him." "Tea, mercy," Madame Poirot said, settling into a wicker chair with the grace of a cat. "You are most kind. Tell me, how do you find St. Lou? A far cry from your Australia, Nan." "Oh, it's a ripper of a place," Mrs. Croft replied, pouring tea with a flourish. "The sea, the cliff sits like a postcard. Bert and I were just passing through, seeing the world. But End House, now that's a gem. Poor Nick, though, rattling around in that big place all alone." Hastings accepted a scone, his face alight with curiosity. "You've met Nick's uncle, I hear. The adventurer, was it?" Mrs. Croft's hand paused mid-pour, a flicker of something surprise, perhaps crossing her face before her smile returned. "Old Tom Buckley. Oh yes, we crossed paths years ago in Sydney. Quite the character, always chasing some lost treasure or another. Sad to hear he's gone. Nick's got his spirit, though, hasn't she?" Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Indeed. And you, madame, you have known Mademoiselle Nick long?" Not long," she said, waving a hand. "Met her when we rented this place. She's a darling, but well, you've seen End House. Falling to bits, isn't it? Needs a fortune to fix it up." Before Poirot could press further, the door burst open, and Mr. Albert Croft strode in. A broad-shouldered man with a sunburned face and a grin to match his wife's. His shirt was smeared with soil, and he carried a pair of gardening shears. "Gidget, gents. Sorry, I'm late battling those blasted aphids. You're the detective, eh? Nick's been singing your praises." Poirot inclined his head. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend, Captain Hastings. We are, shall we say, interested in the welfare of Mademoiselle Buckley." Bert's grin faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered, clapping his hands. "Good on ya. Nick's a fine lass, but she's had a rough go. All those accidents makes you wonder, doesn't it?" "Wonder, Monsieur Croft." Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes gleamed like polished jade. "What is it that you wonder?" Bert laughed a touch too loudly. "Oh, just that she's got bad luck, that's all. Falling boulders, dodgy brakes. You think the cliffs themselves have it in for her." Hastings chuckled, but Poirot's expression remained unreadable. He sipped his tea, his mind clearly elsewhere. The Crofts' warmth was disarming, their stories colourful, but there was a rhythm to their responses, a rehearsed quality that set Poirot's nerves on edge. He decided to test the waters. "Madame Croft mentioned your acquaintance with Nick's uncle," Poirot said, setting down his cup. "A man of adventure. Did he speak of his travels, perhaps of treasures or secrets he uncovered?" Ellen's eyes flicked to her husband, a silent communication that Poirot noted. "Oh, Tom was full of tales," she said breezily. "Gold mines, shipwrecks, you name it. Never knew what was true and what was just a yarn." Bert nodded, leaning back in his chair. "He was a bit of a larrikin, old Tom. Loved a good story. Said something once about a map, didn't he, Ellen? Some buried loot from his sailing days. A map." Hastings leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What sort of map?" Ellen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just one of his fancies. Probably nothing. He was always talking about hidden riches, but we never saw a scrap of it." Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a sign Hastings recognized as the detective's mind latching onto a clue. "And this map," Poirot said, "did Mademoiselle Nick ever mention it?" The Crofts exchanged another glance, this one longer. "Not a peep," Bert said firmly. "If she's got a treasure map, she's keeping it close to her chest." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, the weather, the local regatta, but Poirot's attention remained fixed on the couple's every word, every gesture. Their hospitality was impeccable, yet there was a stagecraft to it, as if they were playing roles in a well-rehearsed play. When Poirot and Hastings finally took their leave, The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the cliff path in twilight shadows. "Well, they're a jolly pair," Hastings remarked as they walked back toward the majestic hotel. "Can't see them as villains, Poirot. They're too cheerful, mon ami." Poirot's tone was dry. "The lion smiles before it pounces. There is something about the Crofts, something they do not say. Did you not notice how they spoke of Tom Buckley? As if they knew him better than they admit." Hastings frowned. "You think they're hiding something?" "I think," Poirot said, pausing to gaze at the sea, "that everyone in St. Loup is hiding something, and I intend to find out what." Their walk took them past End House, its silhouette stark against the darkening sky. The windows glowed faintly, and Poirot's eyes lingered on the upper floors, where Nick's bedroom lay. He was about to comment, when a soft thud drew his attention to the parlor window. There, on the sill, lay a small, torn photograph, its edges curling in the breeze. Poirot retrieved it with a handkerchief, holding it to the fading light. The image showed a man, presumably Tom Buckley, given his resemblance to Nick, standing beside a woman with sharp features and dark hair. Her face was unfamiliar, but her posture suggested confidence, perhaps defiance. The photograph was ripped down the middle, severing the woman's face from her body. Poirot's fingers tightened around the find. "Hastings," he said softly, "this is no accident. Someone wished this photograph to be found or destroyed." Before Hastings could respond, a scream pierced the air, high and sharp, from within End House. Poirot's cane hit the ground, and he moved with surprising speed toward the door, Hastings at his heels. The scream had come from the upper floor, and as they burst into the hall, they found Nick at the foot of the stairs, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped. It was upstairs. Something moved. Poirot's eyes scanned the shadowy hall, his mind racing. The photograph, the Crofts' evasive answers, and now this scream. What thread connected them? As he climbed the stairs, his heart pounded not with fear, but with the thrill of the chase. The game, as he often called it, was afoot. The upper hallway was dim, the air thick with the musty scent of old wood. Nick pointed to her bedroom door, ajar, its hinges creaking faintly. Poirot pushed it open, revealing a room in disarray, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, and a heavy mirror leaning precariously against the wall, as if it had been moved in haste. Hastings checked the window, finding it locked from the inside. "No one's here," Hastings said, puzzled. Perhaps it was the wind. Poirot shook his head, his gaze fixed on a single rose petal on the floor, its vibrant red stark against the faded rug. "The wind does not scream, mon ami, nor does it leave petals from a garden that belongs to Monsieur Croft." Nick's eyes widened. "You think someone was in my room?" "I think," Poirot said, his voice low, "that someone searches for something, and they are growing desperate." As they escorted Nick back to the safety of the parlor, Poirot's mind churned. The Crofts' connection to Tom Buckley, the torn photograph, the scream, each was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He glanced at the cliffs, where the sea roared below, and felt the weight of the mystery deepen. Who had been in Nick's room, and what were they seeking? The answer, he knew, lay just beyond his grasp, waiting to be unveiled. Chapter 5. The Ghost of End House. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Cornish cliffs with streaks of amber and violet. St. Loup, with its quaint charm and briny air, seemed to hush as twilight settled over the seaside town. His mustache, impeccably trimmed, stood on the terrace of the majestic hotel, his keen eyes scanning the distant silhouette of End House perched precariously above the sea. Beside him, Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, sipped a gin and tonic, his brow furrowed with unease. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low, "do you really believe Miss Buckley's accidents are deliberate? It seems so. Improbable. A boulder, a painting, a car, surely it's just bad luck." Poirot's eyes twinkled with that familiar glint of certainty. "Mon ami, luck does not fire bullets through sun hats. No, no, we are dealing with a mind most cunning, and yet, I sense we have only scratched the surface of this affair. There is a shadow behind these events, Hastings, a shadow with a purpose." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Nick Buckley herself, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight. She wore a light summer dress, its hem fluttering in the sea breeze, and her laugh was as bright as the gulls overhead. "Monsieur Poirot, you're brooding again. Come, let's walk to End House. The cliffs are glorious at this hour." Poirot agreed, sensing an opportunity to probe further. The trio set off along the coastal path, the sea crashing below, and the wind carrying whispers of salt and mystery. End House loomed ahead, its weathered stone facade a stark contrast to the vibrant life of its young owner. Nick chatted animatedly about her childhood summers there, but Poirot noted a flicker of unease in her eyes when she mentioned her late uncle, Sir Philip Buckley, a celebrated aviator whose plane had crashed under mysterious circumstances a decade ago. As they approached the wrought iron gates, Nick paused. "You know, there's an old story about End House," she said, her tone half-joking. "They say it's haunted. The locals claim my uncle's ghost wanders the cliffs, searching for something he lost." "Silly, isn't it?" Hastings shivered, glancing at the darkening sky. "Ghosts? Surely you don't believe that, Nick?" She laughed, but it was brittle. "Of course not. But the house does feel heavy sometimes, like it's holding secrets." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Secrets, mademoiselle? Perhaps you will indulge me. What do the locals say of this ghost?" Nick hesitated, then led them through the overgrown garden to the house's front door. "They say Sir Philip was working on something important before he died, a project tied to his flights. Some even whisper he was murdered, and his spirit can't rest until the truth is known. It's all nonsense, of course." Poirot's mind raced. A murdered aviator, a haunted house, and now a series of attempts on Nick's life. Coincidence was no longer a plausible explanation. As they entered the dimly lit hall of End House, the air grew colder, the scent of damp stone mingling with something sharper, almost metallic. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the faded grandeur, a grand staircase, a chandelier coated in dust, and portraits of stern-faced Buckleys staring down from the walls. Nick offered tea, and they settled. In the drawing-room, its windows offering a panoramic view of the cliffs, Hastings, ever eager to lighten the mood, recounted a tale of a ghostly encounter from his army days, but Poirot was distracted. His fingers brushed the armrest of his chair, and he paused, leaning down to inspect the floor. There, barely visible, in the firelight, was a faint white powder. He knelt, careful not to disturb it, and sniffed delicately. "Cocaine," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Hastings nearly dropped his teacup. "Cocaine here. Surely you're mistaken, Poirot." Nick's eyes widened, her hand trembling as she set down her saucer. "That's impossible. Nobody here uses that sort of thing." Poirot rose, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle, the evidence does not lie. This powder is recent, and it suggests a connection to your so-called accidents. We must proceed with caution." Before Nick could respond, a sharp rap at the door startled them. It was Maggie Buckley, Nick's cousin, a quiet woman with mousy brown hair and a nervous demeanor. She had arrived in St. Louis that morning, claiming concern for Nick's safety after hearing of her accidents. Her arrival had seemed fortuitous, but Poirot's instincts whispered otherwise. "Maggie," Nick exclaimed, rushing to embrace her. "You didn't tell me you were coming by tonight." Maggie's smile was strained. "I couldn't sleep. Nick, I keep thinking about those accidents. You're not safe here." Poirot studied Maggie closely, noting the way her eyes darted to the corners of the room, as if expecting something or someone to emerge. "Mademoiselle Maggie, you have known of these incidents for some time. Have you any theories about their cause?" Maggie hesitated, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. I don't know. But last night, when I was walking near the cliffs, I saw something. A figure, all in white, moving toward End House. It vanished before I could get closer." Hastings gasped. "The ghost? You saw Sir Philip's ghost?" Nick rolled her eyes. "Oh, Maggie, not you too. It was probably just a local out for a stroll." Poirot, however, was not so dismissive. "Describe this figure, Mademoiselle Maggie. Every detail, s'il vous plaît." Maggie's voice trembled as she recounted the sighting. A tall, ethereal figure draped in white, moving silently along the cliff path before disappearing into the mist. The story sent a chill through the room, and even Nick's bravado faltered. Poirot, ever the rationalist, suspected a human hand behind the apparition, but the cocaine discovery gnawed at him. Was it a clue to the motive, or a distraction planted by a cunning adversary? Determined to investigate, Poirot proposed a nighttime vigil. "If this ghost is indeed a person, we shall catch them in the act. Hastings, you and I will patrol the grounds tonight. Mademoiselle Nick, you and Mademoiselle Maggie will remain here, under lock and key." Nick protested, but Poirot's authority was unshakable. As midnight approached, he and Hastings donned coats and slipped into the garden, the moon casting eerie shadows across the cliffs. The wind howled, carrying the distant crash of waves, and Hastings clutched a flashlight, his nerves frayed. "Poirot," he whispered, "what if it really is a ghost? I mean Sir Philip's death, the cocaine, the accident. It's all so strange." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "Ghosts do not leave cocaine in drawing rooms, mon ami. No, this is a human plot, and I intend to unravel it." They positioned themselves behind a gnarled oak, its branches clawing at the sky. Hours passed, the cold seeping into their bones, until a faint glow appeared near the cliff's edge. Hastings stiffened, but Poirot's hand on his arm kept him silent. The glow moved closer, revealing a figure in a flowing white garment, gliding toward Endhouse. It paused, seemingly unaware of their presence, and bent to examine something. On the ground, Poirot sprang into action, his agility surprising for a man of his stature. "Aratas!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. The figure froze, then bolted toward the cliffs. Hastings gave chase, his longer legs closing the distance, but the figure was nimble, darting between rocks. Poirot, panting, followed, his mind racing. The chase ended abruptly when the figure slipped, tumbling into a shallow gully. Hastings pounced, pinning the figure down, only to gasp as he pulled back the hood. It was no ghost, but a young man, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "Get off me," he snarled, struggling against Hastings' grip. Poirot arrived, his breath steadying. "Who are you, monsieur, and why do you haunt Endhouse?" The man glared, his eyes wild. "I'm nobody, just a drifter. I heard the house was empty, thought I'd look for valuables." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "A drifter who wears a theatrical costume and leaves cocaine in his wake. Nan, you will tell us the truth, or Inspector Japp will have a most interesting conversation with you." The man's defiance crumbled, and he slumped. "All right, my name's Tom Carver. I was hired to scare Miss Buckley. Someone paid me to dress up, make her think the house was haunted. They said it'd make her leave." "Who?" Poirot demanded. "Who hired you?" Carver shook his head. "I don't know. They sent cash and instructions through the post. I swear, I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Hastings looked to Poirot, bewildered. "A hired ghost. This is madness." Poirot's expression was grim. "Not madness, Hastings. Strategy. Someone wishes to drive Mademoiselle Nick from Endhouse, and they are willing to use fear, drugs, and perhaps murder to achieve it." They escorted Carver to the hotel, where Poirot arranged for a local constable to hold him. Returning to Endhouse, they found Nick and Maggie shaken but unharmed. Poirot revealed the night's events, omitting Narect, the ghost of Endhouse. Poirot's revelation about Tom Carver, the hired ghost, sent a ripple of shock through Nick and Maggie. The idea that someone was orchestrating a campaign of fear to drive Nick from Endhouse was both chilling and perplexing. Nick, her usual bravado tempered by the night's events, sank into an armchair, her face pale. "Who would do this, Monsieur Poirot, and why?" "I've no enemies, at least. None I know of." Maggie, hovering near the fireplace, wrung her hands. "It's this house," she whispered. "It's always been wrong. Ever since Uncle Philip died, there's been a shadow over it." Poirot paced the drawing room, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor. "Mademoiselle Maggie, you mentioned seeing this figure last night. Did you notice anything distinctive, perhaps a scent, a sound, anything that might identify this person?" Maggie frowned, her eyes distant. "There was a faint smell, like something chemical, not perfume, but sharp, almost medicinal. I couldn't place it." Poirot's mind snapped to the cocaine he'd found earlier. The drug's presence in the drawing room, combined with Maggie's description, suggested a connection to the underworld, a world far removed from the genteel facade of St. Lou. But how did it tie to Nick's accidents? Was the drug a clue to the motive, or merely a tool to unsettle her? He turned to Nick. "Mademoiselle, you spoke of your uncle's project. Do you know any details? Papers, perhaps, or artifacts he might have left behind?" Nick shook her head, but her expression faltered. "There's the attic. It's full of his old things, logbooks, maps, mechanical parts. I never went through them. It felt intrusive." Poirot's eyes lit up. "Then we shall intrude. Mademoiselle, secrets do not remain hidden forever." They ascended the creaking staircase to the attic, a cavernous space filled with dust-covered trunks and crates. The air was thick with the musty scent of old leather and oil. Hastings, ever-practical pride, open a trunk, revealing a collection of Sir Philip's belongings, aviator goggles, a cracked leather journal, and a peculiar brass device etched with strange symbols. Poirot's fingers traced the device, his mind worry. "This," he said, holding it up, "is no ordinary tool. It resembles a navigational instrument, but its design is unconventional. Perhaps it is tied to his mysterious project." Nick's eyes widened. "You think someone's after this? But why now, after all these years?" Poirot did not answer, but his thoughts churned. Sir Philip's death, the cocaine, the staged haunting someone believed Endhouse held a secret worth killing for. The chapter closed with Poirot clutching the journal, its pages promising answers, as the wind howled outside, whispering of dangers yet to come. Chapter 6. The Masquerade of Motivest. The sun hung low over the cliffs of St. Lou, casting a golden sheen across the restless waves that battered the rocks below Endhouse. The air was thick with the briny temps of the sea, and a restless wind tugged at the heavy drapes of the old mansion, as if urging the secrets within to spill forth. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccably clad in a tailored suit despite the seaside informality, stood in the drawing-room of Endhouse, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of those gathered. Beside him, Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, fidgeted with his tie, his brow furrowed with the weight of the morning's grim discovery. Maggie Buckley, Nick's cousin, lay dead in the garden, her lifeless form discovered under the pale moonlight, draped in Nick's distinctive scarlet shawl. The police, led by the pragmatic Chief Inspector Japp, had descended upon Endhouse like a flock of gulls, their boots trampling the dew-soaked grass as they cordoned off the scene. The gunshot that had ended Maggie's life still seemed to echo in the minds of all present, a stark reminder that the danger Poirot had suspected was no mere fancy. Someone in this circle of friends, or perhaps someone lurking in the shadows of Endhouse, was a murderer. Poirot's gaze darted from one suspect to another, his mind a whirl of calculations. Nick Buckley, the vivacious yet now pale owner of Endhouse, sat on a faded velvet chaise, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her dark eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were clouded with grief, or was it guilt? Beside her, Freddie Rice, the glamorous widow with a penchant for silk dresses and a haunted air, lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. Jim Lazarus, the reserved art dealer with a face that betrayed little, leaned against the mantelpiece, his arms crossed. The Australian couple, Bert and Millie Croft, sat close together on a sagging sofa, their cheerful demeanor jarring against the somber mood. And then there was the household staff alone, the stoic housekeeper and her husband, William, the groundskeeper, hovering at the edges of the room, their faces unreadable. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, stroking his mustache. "The tragedy of Mademoiselle Maggie is no accident. It is a masquerade, a performance designed to deceive. But who wears the mask?" Hastings, catching Poirot's words, leaned closer. "You think Maggie was killed by mistake, don't you? The shawl she was wearing Nick's shawl. The killer thought she was Nick." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami, or perhaps the killer wished us to think so. The truth, it hides behind many veils. We must peel them back, one by one." Japp, bustling in with a notebook in hand, cleared his throat. "Right, Mr. Poirot, I've got my men combing the grounds." Bullet came from a small caliber pistol, likely fired from the shrubbery. No sign of the weapon yet. "Miss Buckley, Nick says she was in her room when the shot was fired. Anyone corroborate that?" Nick's voice was soft, almost fragile. "I was alone, Inspector. I couldn't sleep, so I was reading. I heard the shot and thought it was a car backfiring until Hastings came to my door." Poirot's head tilted, his gaze fixed on Nick. "And the shawl, mademoiselle? Why was your cousin wearing it?" Nick's fingers tightened. "It was chilly last night. Maggie borrowed it when we stepped outside to look at the stars. She loved the garden at night." Freddie exhaled a plume of smoke, her voice low and husky. "Poor Maggie. She was so innocent. Who could do this to her?" Jim Lazarus shifted, his jaw tight. "It's monstrous. Nick, you should have told us about those accidents sooner. We could have protected you both." The Crofts nodded in unison, Bert's booming voice cutting through the tension. "Too right, mate. This place is starting to feel like a death trap. You ought to sell Endhouse, Nick, and get out while you can." Millie Croft, her round face flushed, added, "We've been saying it for weeks, haven't we, Bert? This old pile's got bad vibes. No offense, Love. Poirot's lips curved faintly. Bad vibes, Madame Croft, or is it that end house holds secrets some wish to remain buried? The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling like dust. Jap, undeterred, pressed on. I'll need statements from everyone. And Mr. Poirot, if you've got any of your fancy theories, I'd like to hear em. Patience, Inspector, Poirot said, raising a hand. First, we must establish the motives. Who gains from the death of Mademoiselle Maggiore, if the killer's aim was true, from the death of Mademoiselle Nick? Hastings frowned. But who'd want Maggie dead? She only arrived yesterday. She didn't know anyone here except Nick. Precisement, Poirot said. And yet, she is dead. We must consider all possibilities. Perhaps Maggie saw something she should not have. Perhaps she was a threat to someone's plans. Or perhaps, as you suggest, Hastings, she was merely in the wrong place, wearing the wrong shawl. Nick's eyes widened. You think someone meant to kill me? But why? I haven't done anything to anyone. Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. That, mademoiselle, is what we must discover. And to do so, we must look into the hearts of those around you. The morning wore on, with Jap and his men methodically questioning the household. Poirot, however, preferred his own methods. He wandered the creaking halls of End House, his polished shoes silent on the worn rugs, his mind cataloguing every detail. The mansion was a labyrinth of faded grunge-appealing wallpaper, chipped cornices, and portraits of stern Buckley ancestors, whose eyes seemed to follow him. In the library, he found Nick sorting through a pile of papers, her face drawn. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, closing the door behind him, a word, if you please. These accidents, the car, the boulder, the painting, when did they begin? Nick hesitated, her fingers pausing on a yellowed envelope. About a month ago. I didn't think much of them at first. Just bad luck. Bad luck, Poirot repeated, his tone dry. And yet, they escalate, do they not? And now, your cousin is dead. Tell me, who benefits if you are no longer here? Nick's laugh was brittle. Benefits. End House is a money pit. I'm drowning in debts. The only thing I've got is this place, and it's falling apart. And your friends, Poirot pressed. Madame Rice, Monsieur Lazarus, the Crofts, they seem very attentive. They're just worried, Nick said quickly. Freddie's been my rock since her husband died. Jim's always been sweet, in his quiet way. And the Crofts, they're tenants, but they've become like family. Poirot's mustache twitched. Family, mademoiselle. Vultures circling a wounded bird. Nick flinched, but before she could reply, a soft knock interrupted. Ellen, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her face pale. Sir, there's something you should see. In Miss Nick's room. Poirot and Nick followed Ellen upstairs, Hastings trailing behind. Nick's bedroom was a study in contrasts, a four-poster bed draped in faded silk, a modern gramophone in the corner, and a cluttered vanity strewn with lipsticks and perfume bottles. Ellen pointed to the desk, where a drawer stood slightly ajar. I was dusting, Ellen said, her voice steady but her eyes darting. I found this. I didn't touch it, sir. Poirot approached the desk, his gloved hands deftly opening the drawer. Inside lay a folded document, its edges crisp despite the dust. He unfolded it with care, revealing a will, handwritten and signed by Nick Buckley. The beneficiary was not Freddie, nor Jim, nor even the Crofts, but a name Poirot did not recognize. Charles Vyse, identified as Nick's cousin and a solicitor in London. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. When did you write this, mademoiselle? Nick's face paled. A year ago. Charles's family. He's been helping with the estate's legal mess. I didn't think. I mean, it's just a precaution. A precaution, Poirot echoed, his eyes narrowing. And yet, it changes everything. If you die, mademoiselle, End House and all its secrets pass to Monsieur Vyse. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, gasped, Good Lord, Poirot, you don't think this Vyse chap is behind it? Poirot folded the will and tucked it into his pocket. We shall see, Hastings. But first, we must speak to everyone. The killer, I think, is growing restless. The afternoon brought a tense gathering in the dining room, where Poirot had requested everyone's presence. The long mahogany table was set with mismatched china, a relic of End House's better days. Jap stood by the window, his notebook open, while Poirot took center stage, his small stature somehow commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and precise. The death of Mademoiselle Maggie is a tragedy, but it is also a puzzle. To solve it, we must ask, who had reason to wish harm to Mademoiselle Nick? For I believe it is she who was the true target. Freddie stubbed out her cigarette, her lips tight. That's absurd. Nick's one of us. Who'd want her dead? Jim Lazarus cleared his throat. Maybe it's about money. Nick's always joking about being broke, but Endhouse is worth something, isn't it? Birdcroft chuckled, though it sounded forced. Worth a fortune, if you ask me. Prime seaside property, even if it's a bit run down. Millie nudged him sharply. Don't be crass, Bert. Nick's in mourning. Poirot's eyes flicked to Nick, who sat silently, her hands folded. Mademoiselle, you have said little. Tell me, have you enemies? Someone who bears you ill will? Nick shook her head, but her voice trembled. No one. I mean, I've had my share of rows, but nothing serious. Poirot's gaze shifted to Freddie. Madame Rice, you and Mademoiselle Nick are close, Nan. Yet I sense a tension. Perhaps you know more than you say. Freddie's eyes flashed. I don't know what you're implying, Monsieur Poirot. Nick's my best friend. I'd do anything for her. Anything, Poirot repeated softly, a powerful word. Jim Lazarus stepped forward, his voice low. Look, Poirot, you're barking up the wrong tree. Maybe it's an outsider. Someone sneaking around the cliffs at night. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps the danger is closer than you think. As the meeting dispersed, Poirot pulled Hastings aside, leading him to the garden where Maggie's body had been found. The chalk outline remained, a stark white against the grass. Poirot knelt, examining the ground, his fingers brushing over a patch of disturbed earth. Hastings, he said, observe the grass here is flattened, as if someone stood for some time. The killer, perhaps, waiting for their moment. Hastings shivered. It's eerie, Poirot, to think someone was out here, watching, planning. Precisement, Poirot said, rising. And now, we must plan. The killer believes they have struck a blow, but they have also revealed themselves. They are here, among us, and they will make a mistake. The wind howled, carrying the distant cry of a gull. Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination, his mind already weaving the threads of the mystery into a tapestry only he could see. The chapter closed with the sound of the sea, relentless and unyielding, as if echoing the pulse of the killer's next move. Chapter 7. The Masquerade of Motives. The wind howled across the cliffs of St. Loup, rattling the ancient windows of Endhouse, as if the sea itself were demanding entry. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands clasped. Behind his back, his moustache quivering slightly as he surveyed the assembled company. The air was thick with suspicion, a storm brewing not just outside but within these walls, where secrets clung like damp to the stones. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood by his side, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep pace with Poirot's labyrinthine thoughts. The suspects Nick Buckley, Freddie Rice, Jim Lazarus, and the Crofts sat in uneasy silence, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a chandelier that swayed faintly in the draught. Nick, the young mistress of Endhouse, lounged in a velvet armchair, her dark curls tumbling over one shoulder. Her nonchalance was a performance, Poirot noted, a mask as carefully crafted as the embroidered shawl draped across her lap. Freddie Rice, her glamorous friend, sat rigid, her pale fingers twisting a silk handkerchief, her eyes darting to Jim Lazarus, whose boyish charm was undercut by a nervous tick in his jaw. The Crofts, the Australian couple renting the lodge, beamed with an almost theatrical cheer, their broad smiles jarring against the tension. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, a clap of thunder shaking the room as Poirot began to speak. Mies, Amos, he said, his voice soft yet commanding. We are gathered here not for pleasantries, but to unravel a tangle of motives. Mademoiselle Nick has survived, by my count, 4 attempts on her life. A bullet, a boulder, a painting, and now poisoned chocolates. This is no coincidence, no jest. Someone in this room, or very near, wishes her dead. Nick laughed, a brittle sound that cut through the silence. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you're making a drama out of nothing. I'm clumsy, that's all. And the chocolate's probably a mistake at the shop. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A mistake, Mademoiselle Nan. The cocaine in those chocolates was no error. It was deliberate, calculated, and meant to kill. And so, we must ask, who benefits from your death? Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering to Jim Lazarus. The young artist's hands were stuffed in his pockets, but his knuckles were white. Freddie's lips parted, as if to speak, but she caught herself, her eyes sliding to the floor. The Crofts exchanged a glance, their smiles faltering for a fraction of a second. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet. "Let us begin with alibis. The night of the bullet, where were you all?" Jim cleared his throat. "I was at the pub, the Rusty Anchor. Ask anyone there." "Indeed." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, Monsieur Lazarus, the barman recalls you leaving early, around 9. The bullet was fired at 10. A curious gap. Nan." Jim's face flushed. "I went for a walk. Needed air." "A walk," Poirot repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "And you, Madame Rice?" Freddie's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I was here, with Nick. We were playing cards." Nick nodded, but Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, mademoiselle, you told me you were alone that evening, reading. A small discrepancy, perhaps, but in murder, no detail is small." The Crofts, silent until now, leaned forward. "We were in our lodge," said Mr. Croft, his voice booming with forced joviality. "Weren't we, Ellen? Listening to the wireless." "Indeed we were," Mrs. Croft chirped, her accent slipping slightly, a hint of something less Antipodean creeping in. Poirot's mustache twitched. He had noticed their accents before. Too polished, too practiced. Were they truly who they claimed to be? The storm outside roared, a gust slamming a shutter against the wall. Hastings jumped, and Nick gave a nervous laugh. "This old house," she said. "It's falling apart, just like my luck." Poirot ignored her deflection. "Let us turn to motive. Mademoiselle Nick, you are not wealthy, yet you own End House, a valuable property. And now, with the tragic death of your fiancé, Michael Seaton, you stand to inherit a fortune that, perhaps, others covet." Nick's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "That's absurd. No one here cares about Michael's money." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but money has a way of whispering to the greedy. And there is another matter, the locked drawer in your desk. Mademoiselle, what does it conceal?" Nick's fingers tightened on her shawl. "Nothing important, just personal papers." Poirot's smile was thin. "Personal papers, or perhaps a will, one that names a beneficiary who might grow impatient." The room fell silent, save for the storm's relentless howl. Freddie's handkerchief was now a twisted knot, and Jim's tic had worsened. The Crofts' smiles held, but their eyes were cold, calculating. Hastings, unable to contain himself, blurted Poirot. "You don't think one of them patients, mon ami?" Poirot interrupted. "The truth is like a fine wine, it must be savored slowly. But I will say this, someone in this room knows more than they admit, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find them out." The chandelier flickered, casting shadows that danced like spectres across the walls. Poirot's gaze swept over the group, lingering on each face. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he turned to the fireplace, where a pile of ashes caught his eye. Kneeling, he sifted through them with a handkerchief, extracting a scorched fragment of paper. He held it up, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "A will," he said softly, "or what remains of one. Burned, but not entirely destroyed. Tell me, mademoiselle, who would wish to erase such a document?" Nick's face paled, but before she could answer, a deafening crack of thunder shook the house, and the lights went out. A scream pierced the darkness. Freddie's, high and panicked. When the lights flickered back on, the fragment of the will was gone from Poirot's hand, and the French doors to the terrace stood ajar, rain lashing the floor. "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered, his voice sharp with irritation. "The game accelerates." The storm trapped them all at End House, the roads to St. Louis impassable, the telephone lines down. Poirot, undeterred, saw opportunity in confinement. "We are all here," he told Hastings privately, in the dim light of a candle-lit hallway. "The killer cannot flee, and so we shall peel back their mask." Hastings, clutching a candlestick, looked uneasy. "But Poirot, that will fragment it, could name anyone, and someone took it, right under our noses." Poirot said, his eyes alight. "The thief is desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes. We must watch, Hastings, and listen." They returned to the drawing-room, where the group had scattered into uneasy clusters. Nick stood by the window, staring into the storm, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Freddie and Jim whispered in a corner, their heads bent close, while the Crofts sat by the fire, their cheerfulness now a brittle facade. Poirot approached Nick, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, the will tell me of it. Who did you name as your heir?" Nick hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her shawl. "It's old, Monsieur Poirot. I wrote it years ago, before Michael. I left everything to Maggie, my cousin. But she's dead, so it's meaningless now." Maggie Buckley, Poirot mused, the cousin who died so tragically, and yet someone thought this will worth destroying. Why? Nick shrugged, but her eyes flickered with something fear, perhaps, or guilt. Poirot filed it away, his mind racing. Maggie's death, the will, the fortune threads of a tapestry, but the pattern remained elusive. He turned to the Crofts, who were now sipping tea from chipped porcelain cups. "Monsieur and Madame Croft, you are recent arrivals in St. Louis. Tell me, what brought you to this remote corner of England?" Mr. Croft chuckled, his teeth gleaming in the firelight. "Adventure, mate. We wanted a taste of the English seaside. Endhouse was a steal couldn't resist." "A steal," Poirot echoed, his tone neutral. "And yet, you seem unusually invested in Mademoiselle Nick's affairs. Your concern is touching, but perhaps not entirely selfless." Mrs. Croft's cup clattered against its saucer. "Now, see here, Mr. Poirot, we're just friendly folks. No need to go poking about." Poirot smiled, but it was a smile that promised no mercy. "I poke, madame, because that is my nature, and I find it curious that your accents, how shall I say, waver like the tide." The Crofts froze, their smiles vanishing. Before they could respond, Jim Lazarus stood, his voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. You're accusing everyone, Poirot. Maybe it's not one of us. Maybe it's that dealer, George, skulking around the cliffs." Freddie gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Jim, don't what?" Jim snapped, his composure cracking. "He's been selling to half the town. Maybe he's got a grudge against Nick." Poirot's eyes narrowed. George, the local dealer, had indeed been mentioned in whispers, a shadowy figure supplying Freddie's cocaine habit. But was he a convenient scapegoat, or something more? The storm raged on. The wind now abandoned. "Well," Poirot gathered the group again, his voice cutting through the tension. "Let us play a game," he said, his tone deceptively light. "Each of you will tell me one truth about yourself, something you have hidden. Perhaps it will illuminate the shadows." Nick went first, her voice steady but strained. I lied about being alone the night of the bullet. I was with someone, but I won't say who. It's private." Freddie's turn came next. She hesitated, then whispered, "I owe money, a lot of it, to someone dangerous. That's why I stay close to Nick." Jim's confession was reluctant. "I painted a portrait of Nick last year. It's hidden in my studio. I didn't want anyone to know how I feel about her." The Crofts exchanged a glance, then Mr. Croft spoke. "We're not as rich as we seem. We borrowed to rent the lodge, hoping to make connections here." Poirot listened, his mind cataloguing each revelation. None were outright admissions of guilt, but each was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of motive. Love, debt, ambition, the ingredients of murder. As the night deepened, Poirot and Hastings searched the drawing room for clues to the stolen will fragment. In the fireplace, among the ashes, Hastings found a tiny scrap of paper, overlooked in the thief's haste. It bore a single word, "Maggie." "Maggie again," Hastings murmured. "But she's dead, Poirot. What does it mean?" "It means, mon ami," Poirot said, "that the past is not as dead as we think, and the killer knows it." They returned to the group, but the atmosphere had shifted. Nick was pale, her hands trembling. Freddie was staring at Jim, her eyes wide with something like betrayal. The Crofts had retreated to their corner, their whispers urgent, and outside, the storm showed no sign of abating, as if nature itself were conspiring to keep the truth buried. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the scrap of paper hidden in his pocket. "The will was burned for a reason," he said. "It names someone who cannot afford to be named, and that someone is here, listening, watching. But fear not, I am watching, too." A log in the fire cracked, sending sparks flying. The group flinched, and in that moment Poirot saw it, a flicker of panic in one pair of eyes. He said nothing, but his little grey cells hummed with certainty. The killer had made a mistake, and soon, the masquerade would end. Chapter 8. The Australian's Deception. The Cornish sun hung low over St. Louis, its golden rays painting the sea in hues of amber and sapphire, a deceptive calm that belied the storm brewing at Endhouse. Hercule Poirot sat at a small table outside the Café de la Mer, a quaint seaside establishment nestled along the promenade, where the scent of espresso mingled with the taint of salt. His cream linen suit was impeccable, his mustache waxed to a razor's edge, but his green eyes, sharp as the cliffs beyond, betrayed a mind in relentless motion. The Star of the Sea, a legendary sapphire hidden within Endhouse's walls, had emerged as the heart of a deadly plot, its cursed allure drawing danger to Nick Buckley, the young heiress who had narrowly escaped death 4 times. Now, Poirot's little grey cells hummed with purpose, zeroing in on Mr. Croft, the charming Australian whose easy smile masked a shadow of deceit. The events of the past days had woven a tapestry of intrigue, a bullet through Nick's hat, a chandelier's crash, a poisoned cocktail, and a coded message in a silk glove, all pointing to a conspiracy targeting Nick and her ancestral jewel. The smuggler's cave beneath Endhouse, uncovered in the previous chapter, had revealed a logbook linking the sapphire to a historical crime, and the name of Croft's alias James Harrow hinted at a deeper game. Poirot had summoned Croft to the café under the pretense of a casual chat, but his intent was surgical, to unmask the man whose polished exterior clashed with the whispers of his criminal ties. The café buzzed with life, its patrons a mix of sunburned tourists and local fishermen, their laughter punctuated by the clink of glasses. Poirot sipped a tisane, its chamomile warmth soothing his senses, as Croft approached. His broad frame clad in a tailored blazer, a Panama hat tilted rakishly over one eye. His grin was disarming, but Poirot noted the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers toyed with the silver cigarette case embossed with a serpent crest, a detail that echoed the cigarette end found on the cliff path. "Monsieur Poirot," Croft said, easing into the chair opposite, his Australian drawl as smooth as the sea's surface. "Fancy meeting you here. St. Lou's a bit quiet for a man of your talents, isn't it?" Poirot's smile was polite, his eyes unyielding. "Quiet, Monsieur Croft, is merely the calm before the storm. I find St. Lou most illuminating. You, I understand, are a man of the world. Tell me, what brings you to this corner of England?" Croft's laugh was hearty, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, you know, the sea, the sun, a bit of adventure. I'm a wanderer, Monsieur Poirot. Endhouse caught my eye. Nick's a charming girl, and that old pile's got stories." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his amusement. "Stories, oui, and perhaps secrets. The Star of the Sea, for instance, a sapphire of great value, hidden in Endhouse. You have heard of it, no doubt." Croft's hands stilled on the cigarette case, his grin faltering for a fraction of a second. "A sapphire sounds like local legend. Nick's always spinning tales about her family's past. I'm just a guest, not one for treasure hunts." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "And yet, Monsieur Croft, your name, or shall I say, James Harrow, appears in a logbook from Endhouse's smuggler's cave. A curious coincidence, Nan." The air between them thickened, the café's chatter fading to a distant hum. Croft's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around the cigarette case. "Harrow, you've been digging, haven't you, Poirot? I'm flattered, but you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm just a businessman, here for a holiday." Poirot's smile widened, a cat toying with its prey. "A businessman, perhaps, but one with connections to a certain London syndicate, I think. A syndicate with an interest in rare jewels. Tell me, what is your business with Mademoiselle Buckley?" Before Croft could respond, a sudden explosion shattered the calmer deafening boom from the harbour, where a small boat erupted in flames, its wreckage scattering across the water. Patrons gasped, rushing to the promenade's edge, but Poirot's eyes remained on Croft, noting the flicker of panic in his expression. The detective rose, his cane tapping the ground, and gestured for Croft to follow. "Come, Monsieur Poirot," said his tone calm but commanding. "We shall see what this disturbance reveals." They hurried to the harbour, where a crowd had gathered, their murmurs mingling with the crackle of flames. Nick Buckley stood among them, her white dress smudged with soot, her face pale but unharmed. Captain Hastings, who had arrived in St. Lou the previous day, was at her side, his honest face creased with concern. "Nick," Hastings called, spotting Poirot. "She was meant to be on that boat, Poirot, a fishing trip with Lazarus. She changed her mind at the last minute." Poirot's gaze swept the scene, the burning wreckage, the acrid smell of petrol, the crowds. Shock. Nick's eyes met his, wide with fear. "Monsieur Poirot, I don't understand. Why is this happening? Poirot's hand rested on her shoulder, his voice soothing. Courage, mademoiselle. You are safe, and I shall ensure you remain so. Tell me, who knew of this fishing trip? Nick's breath hitched. Just Jim Lazarus, I mean. And Freddie, I think. I mentioned it at breakfast. Oh, and Croft was there. Poirot's eyes flicked to Croft, who stood at the crowd's edge, his hat pulled low. Indeed, Monsieur Croft, your alibi for this moment, if you please. Croft's grin returned, but it was strained. I was here, with you, Poirot. You saw me. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Coincidence, monsieur, is a word I distrust. Let us return to End House. There is much to discuss. The drive to End House was tense. The sea's sparkle, now a mocking contrast to the morning's violence. Nick sat beside Hastings in the back seat of Charles Vyse's motor car, her hands twisting in her lap. Poirot in the front noted Charles's tight grip on the wheel, his lawyerly composure fraying. Croft followed in his own car, his presence a silent challenge. End House loomed ahead, its weathered stone walls brooding under the midday sun. The group gathered in the drawing room, where the tall windows framed the restless sea. Freddie Rice was already there, her blonde hair disheveled, a cigarette trembling between her fingers. Jim Lazarus arrived moments later, his tweed jacket streaked with charcoal, his eyes darting nervously. Ellen Wilson, the housekeeper, hovered in the doorway, her stern face unreadable. Poirot took center stage, his small frame commanding the room. Ms. Amos, he began, his voice clear and resonant. Today, Mademoiselle Buckley has escaped death once more. A boat, meant to carry her, has exploded. This is no accident, but a calculated act. Someone in this room knows more than they admit. Freddie's cigarette fell, her voice sharp. This is madness, Poirot. Nick, you can't think one of us did this. Nick's eyes were haunted, but she shook her head. I don't know. Freddie, I just wanted to stop. Charles stepped forward, his voice clipped. Monsieur Poirot, you're stirring panic. That boat could have been faulty old wiring, bad fuel. You've no proof it was meant for Nick. Poirot's gaze was steady, his moustache twitching. Proof, Monsieur Vyse, is what I seek. And I find it curious that Monsieur Croft, who was present when Mademoiselle Buckley planned her trip, has a past that does not align with his present. Croft's laugh was forced, his hand slipping into his pocket. You're reaching, Poirot. I'm a guest, nothing more. Nick's my friend. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A friend, perhaps, but one with a secret. James Harrow, a name linked to a London syndicate, appears in a smuggler's logbook. And this he produced the cigarette case from his pocket, its serpent crest glinting in the light. This was found on the cliff path after the first attempt on Mademoiselle Buckley's life. A match to yours, Nan. The room fell silent, the sea's roar a distant echo. Croft's face paled, his grin fading. That's not mine, Poirot. Plenty of people have cases like that. Poirot's smile was unrelenting. And yet, monsieur, the crest is unique as serpent, a symbol of cunning. I have sent inquiries to London, and I expect answers soon. Until then, I suggest you remain in St. Lou. Freddie's voice broke the tension, her tone brittle. Croft, you said you were just a traveler. What's this about a syndicate? Croft's eyes darted to her, then away. Nothing to it. Freddie, Poirot's spinning tales. I'm no criminal. Hastings, standing by Nick, cleared his throat. Poirot, there's more. I checked the boat before it went out. Someone tampered with the fuel line. Petrol was mixed with an accelerant. This was deliberate. Nick's hand flew to her mouth, her voice a whisper. Deliberate? But why me? What have I done? Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve was iron. Mademoiselle, you are the key to End House, and to the Star of the Sea. Someone desires that jewel, or what it represents. We shall find them. Poirot's inquiries continued through the afternoon, each conversation peeling back layers of deception. He spoke with Lazarus in the garden, where the artist was sketching the cliffs, his charcoal strokes feverish. Lazarus claimed to have been painting in his studio during the boat incident, but his alibi was vague, his hands stained with more than charcoal traces of petrol. Poirot noted, though he said nothing. Ellen, in the kitchen, was equally evasive. I was cleaning the silver, sir, she said, her hands busy with a cloth. Didn't know about no boat trip till after the explosion. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the Star of the Sea, Madame Wilson. You spoke of its curse. Have you seen it? Ellen's cloth stilled, her voice low. "Seen it?" "No, sir, but my gran said it brought death to the Buckleys. If it's real, it's best left alone." Poirot filed her words away, sensing a truth beneath her reticence. Charles, in his study, was more forthcoming, admitting to financial strain, but insisting. His concern for Nick was familial. "She's reckless, Poirot," he said, his pen tapping a ledger. "That jewel, if it exists, could save End House. I've urged her to sell, but she won't listen." Freddie, found on the terrace, was a study in fragility, her eyes shadowed by fear. "I knew Croft was charming, but a criminal. I can't believe it," she said, her voice trembling. "Nick's my friend Poirot. I'd never hurt her." Poirot's smile was gentle, probing. "And yet, Madame Rice, you have debts, Nan. Debts that might tempt one to a sister syndicate." Freddie's face crumpled, her cigarette falling. "I owe money, yes, but not to criminals. I swear, I'm no part of this." Poirot noted her desperation, a piece of the puzzle yet to fit. As evening fell, he and Hastings returned to the harbour, where the wrecked boat had been towed ashore. The local constable, a burly man named Tregowan, confirmed Hastings's findings. The fuel line had been sabotaged. "A crude but effective act, Monsieur Poirot," Tregowan said, scratching his beard. "This ain't no accident. Someone wanted Miss Buckley dead." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The boat's sabotage echoed the precision of the bullet, the chandelier, the poison each attempt bolder. Yet none had succeeded. Was the killer incompetent, or was failure part of the plan? Determined to unmask Croft's true role, Poirot visited his lodgings at a boarding house overlooking the bay. The landlady, a chatty woman with a penchant for gossip, let him in, claiming Croft was out. The room was sparse but telling, a suitcase packed hastily, a map of St. Lou with End House circled, and a coded telegram tucked beneath a blotter. Poirot deciphered it with easy skill, honed in countless cases revealing orders from a London contact: secure the Star, eliminate obstacles. The telegram was a thunderbolt, confirming Croft's ties to a syndicate and his intent to steal the sapphire. But was he the mastermind, or a pawn? Poirot pocketed the telegram, leaving the room undisturbed, and returned to the Grand Hotel to await Croft's next move. That night, as the moon silvered the sea, Poirot received a call from Tregowan. Croft had been spotted at the station, boarding a late train to Plymouth. Poirot and Hastings rushed to intercept him, arriving just as the train's whistle pierced the night. The platform was a flurry of steam and shadows, but Croft was nowhere to be seen. Hastings, panting, scanned the crowd. "He slipped us, Poirot. The man's a ghost." Poirot's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "A ghost, mon ami, leaves footprints. Look there." He pointed to a crumpled map on the platform, marked with a rendezvous point, a secluded cove near St. Lou, set for midnight the next day. Chapter 9. The stolen Wilfer wind howled across the cliffs of St. Lou, carrying the scent of salt and secrets. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room of End House, his sharp green eyes scanning the faces of Nick Buckley's inner circle, Freddie Rice, with her trembling cigarette, Jim Lazarus, his charming smile masking a restless edge, and Charles Vyse, whose spectacles glinted with cold precision. The air was thick with suspicion, each glance a silent accusation. The previous evening's discovery, a dropped watch engraved with an unfamiliar name, had tightened the noose of Poirot's investigation. A bullet, a poisoned gift, a masked figure. The threads of danger were weaving ever closer around Nick, and Poirot's little grey cells were ablaze with the need to unravel them. Captain Hastings, seated near the grand piano, fidgeted with his cufflinks. "Poirot," he whispered, "that watch we found last night, do you think it belongs to the killer? It's the first real clue we've got." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A clue, mon ami, is only as good as the mind that interprets it. The watch is a piece of the puzzle, but not the picture. We must dig deeper into the heart of End House itself." Nick entered, her auburn hair swept into a loose bun, her sea-green eyes clouded with unease. "Monsieur Poirot, have you figured out who's trying to kill me? I barely slept, thinking about that watch. It's not mine, I swear." "Patience, Mademoiselle Nick," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as polished oak. "The truth hides like a pearl in an oyster. Today, we shall open the shell." The morning had begun with a startling revelation. While examining End House's cluttered studio, room stuffed with dusty ledgers and faded portraits, Poirot had unearthed an old will. yellowed and brittle, tucked inside a hollowed-out book. The document, dated 10 years prior, named Nick's cousin Maggie Buckley as the primary beneficiary of End House and its estate should Nick die without heirs. The will's existence cast a new shadow over the case. If Nick were out of the picture, Maggie stood to gain a fortune. Assuming the crumbling estate could be salvaged, Poirot had intended to confront the group about the will, but as he and Hastings returned to the study that morning, they found the safe ajar, the will gone. The lock was untouched, suggesting someone with intimate access to End House had taken it. The theft had ignited Poirot's curiosity, for it confirmed the presence of a cunning hand orchestrating the chaos. Now, in the drawing room, Poirot held court, his small frame commanding the space. "Mes amis," he began, "a document of great importance has vanished from this house. A will, naming Mademoiselle Maggie as heir to End House. Who among you knew of its existence?" The room erupted in murmurs. Freddie's cigarette dropped to the floor, her face pale. "A will? Nick, you never mentioned anything like that." Nick's hands twisted in her lap. "I didn't know about it. My grandfather was always changing his mind about the estate. He probably wrote a dozen wills." Charles adjusted his spectacles. His voice clipped. "As Nick's lawyer, I handled her grandfather's affairs. That will is outdated, superseded by a newer one. It's irrelevant." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Irrelevant, Monsieur Weiss, yet someone found it relevant enough to steal. Tell me, who has access to the study?" "Anyone, really," Nick said, shrugging. "The door's never locked. Charles is in there all the time, fussing over papers. Freddie's borrowed books, and Jim's been poking around for paintings." Jim lit a cigarette, his grin defiant. "Accusing me again. Nick, I'm an art dealer, not a thief. Besides, what's an old will? Worth End House is a money pit." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but to someone, it is a motive worth killing for." Hastings, ever eager to contribute, leaned forward. "Poirot, could the thief be the same person who fired that shot at Nick, or planted the poisoned chocolates?" "Possibly, mon ami," Poirot replied, "but we must consider all possibilities. The will's theft suggests a plan to obscure motive or to create one." As the group bickered, Poirot's mind churned. The will's disappearance pointed to someone close to Nick, someone who knew End House's secrets. Charles, with his legal expertise, could have hidden the document to protect his own interests. Freddie, with her erratic behavior, might be desperate enough to steal for financial gain. And Jim, with his art dealings, could be entangled in a larger scheme. Then there was Nick herself. Her carefree demeanor seemed almost too perfect. A mask for something deeper. To break the tension, Nick suggested a walk along the cliffs. "I need air," she declared, leading the group outside. The path wound through gnarled pines, the sea roaring below, its waves clawing at the rocks. Poirot lagged behind, his cane tapping the earth, his eyes scanning the ground for clues. He noticed a faint footprint in the mud, its tread unusual, too deep for a casual stroller, as if someone had lingered, watching. "Hastings," Poirot murmured, "observe this mark. It is fresh, made within the hour. Someone has been here. Perhaps the same figure we saw last night." Before Hastings could reply, Nick's voice rang out. "Look, down there." She pointed to the beach below, where a small boat bobbed in the cove, its occupant obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The figure rowed swiftly, vanishing behind a rocky outcrop. "Probably a fisherman," Jim said, but his tone lacked conviction. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Or someone who does not wish to be seen. We must investigate this cove later." As they returned to End House, a local fisherman, Tom Croker, approached, his weathered face etched with concern. "Miss Nick," he said, his voice low, "I don't mean to pry, but I saw something odd a few days back, before your car brakes failed. A stranger was tampering with your motor in the garage. Didn't get a good look. Dark hair, maybe, and a fancy coat." Nick's hand flew to her chest. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Tom?" "Didn't think much of it till now," Croker said, scratching his beard. "With all these goings-on, I figured you should know." Poirot thanked the fisherman, his mind racing. The stranger in the fancy coat could be Jim, whose tailored suits matched the description, or an outsider entirely. The cove, the footprint, the stolen Woolwich clue was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. Back at End House, Poirot gathered the group in the library, a room lined with sagging shelves and the faint smell of mildew. He produced the engraved watch, holding it up like a talisman. "This was found last night, dropped by the masked figure who fled. Does anyone recognize the name Evie?" Silence fell, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. Freddie's eyes darted to Jim, who stared at the floor. Charles cleared his throat. It could belong to anyone. "End house gets visitors, tradesmen, friends, or enemies," Poirot said softly. "I propose a test. Tonight, we shall recreate the scene of the painting's fall. Perhaps it will draw our quarry out." The group agreed, though reluctance hung heavy in the air. As evening descended, End House took on an eerie glow, its windows flickering with candlelight. Poirot instructed Nick to retire to her bedroom, where he and Hastings would watch from the shadows. The others were to remain downstairs, under the pretense of a card game. At midnight, the house was still, save for the creak of floorboards and the distant crash of waves. Poirot and Hastings crouched in the hallway, their eyes fixed on Nick's door. A faint rustle came from the stairwell, followed by the soft click of a latch. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his pulse steady but alert. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in a long coat, their face obscured by a scarf. They crept toward Nick's room, a glint of metal in their hand, a knife, perhaps, or a tool. Before Poirot could act, a fog rolled in from the sea, blanketing End House in a ghostly shroud. The figure paused, as if sensing danger, then darted back into the shadows. A gunshot cracked through the night, its echo reverberating from the cliffs. Hastings gasped, grabbing Poirot's arm. "Good Lord, they're at it again." Poirot's voice was a low growl. "Quickly, Hastings, to the cliffs. The fog hides our foe, but it will not hide the truth from Hercule Poirot." Chapter 10. The Cocaine Clue. The sea air hung heavy with salt and suspicion as Hercule Poirot stood on the veranda of the majestic hotel, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. St. Louis cliffs loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged edges softened by the late afternoon haze. Below, waves crashed against the rocks, a restless rhythm that mirrored the unease in Poirot's mind. The case of Nick Buckley, the vibrant young mistress of End House, had grown more tangled with each passing day. 3 near-fatal accidents, a bullet hole in her sun hat, and now a fresh discovery that twisted the mystery into darker territory. Traces of cocaine, hidden in a decorative box within the crumbling walls of End House. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, but perpetually a step behind, joined Poirot on the veranda, his face flushed from a brisk walk along the promenade. "I say, Poirot, this cocaine business is a bit of a shock, isn't it? I mean, Nick doesn't seem the type, does she? All that vitality, that charm, hardly the sort to be mixed up with drugs." Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle signal of his amusement at Hastings' naivety. "Mon ami, you see the surface, but the depths remain hidden. The cocaine, it is not merely a drug, it is a clue, a thread in the tapestry of this affair. We must ask, who placed it there, and why? Is it a distraction, or does it point to the heart of the plot against Mademoiselle Nick?" Hastings frowned, adjusting his hat against the breeze. "You think it's tied to the attempts on her life, but how and who? Freddie Rice, perhaps. She's got that nervous edge, and you saw how she fidgeted when you mentioned the box." "Freddie Rice," Poirot mused, tapping his cane lightly on the wooden floor. She is a possibility. Her past, it whispers of shadows, perhaps, or desperation. But we must not leap to conclusions. The cocaine may be a red herring, or it may be the key to the killer's motive. Come, Hastings, we must return to End House. The answers, they hide in the details." End House stood defiant against the cliffs, its weathered stone facade a testament to both grandeur and decay. The late summer sun cast long shadows across its overgrown gardens, where roses tangled with weeds in a chaotic dance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and sea salt, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to carry a warning. Poirot and Hastings found Nick in the drawing room, sprawled on a faded velvet chaise, her dark hair spilling like ink over a cushion. She was flipping through a magazine, but her eyes darted nervously to the windows, as if expecting an unseen threat. "Nick, my dear," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished marble. "We must speak of a delicate matter. In this house, we have discovered something unexpected. A substance, hidden in a decorative box. Cocaine, to be precise." Nick's magazine slipped to the floor, her face paling. "Cocaine here? You can't be serious, Monsieur Poirot. I've never touched the stuff, I swear." Her voice trembled, but there was a spark of defiance in her green eyes. "Who told you this? Was it Freddie? She's been acting strange, you know, always whispering with that cousin of hers." Poirot raised a hand, his expression unreadable. "No accusations, mademoiselle. I merely seek the truth. This box, it was found in the library, concealed within a carved wooden case. Do you know of it?" Nick shook her head, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. "The library is full of old junk books, trinkets, things my grandfather collected. I never go in there. It's too gloomy. But cocaine, that's absurd. Who would hide it here?" "An excellent question," Poirot said, his gaze drifting to the shadowed corners of the room. "Perhaps someone who wishes to cast suspicion, or someone whose secrets are more dangerous than we know. Tell me, who has access to the library?" "Everyone, I suppose," Nick said, her voice softening. "Maggie, Charles, Freddie, the Crofts, they all come and go. Even the servants poke around when they're cleaning. But why hide drugs here? It doesn't make sense." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Sense, mademoiselle, is what we shall uncover. But for now, I must ask you to be vigilant. The danger, it grows closer." As they left the drawing room, Hastings whispered. She seemed genuinely shocked. "Poirot, do you think she's telling the truth?" "Truth, Hastings, is a chameleon. It changes with the light. Mademoiselle Nick is charming, but charm can hide many things. We must speak with Mademoiselle Freddie." Freddie Rice was in the garden, her slender frame draped in a flowing silk dress that caught the fading sunlight. She was pruning roses with a pair of shears, her movements jerky, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Her pale face, framed by a cascade of auburn hair, turned toward Poirot and Hastings as they approached, her eyes narrowing with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Freddie, my dear," Poirot said, his tone disarming, "we must discuss a matter most serious. In the library, we have found a box containing cocaine. You know of this, perhaps?" Freddie's shears froze mid-snip, a thorn pricking her finger. A bead of blood welled up, and she quickly pressed it to her lips, her eyes darting away. "Cocaine, in End House. That's ridiculous. Why would you think I know anything about it?" Poirot's voice was gentle but relentless. "Because, mademoiselle, you have a history, a struggle, perhaps, with such substances. And your manner, it betrays a certain unease." Freddie laughed, a brittle sound that shattered the garden's quiet. "You've been digging, haven't you?" "Yes, I had a rough patch a few years ago. London, bad company, you know how it goes. But I'm clean now, I swear it. If there's cocaine in that house, it's not mine." Her voice cracked, and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. Hastings, ever the gentleman, stepped forward. "We're not accusing you, Miss Rice, but if you know anything at all it could help Nick. Someone's trying to kill her, after all." Freddie's head snapped back, her eyes blazing. "You think I'd hurt Nick? She's my friend." "I'd never." She stopped, her breath catching. "Look, I don't know about any cocaine, but there's something odd about this place. I've seen things, shadows moving at night, doors left open that should be locked. And Charles Nick, cousin, he's been acting strange, always in the library, muttering about papers and debts." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Monsieur Vyse, interesting. And these shadows, where did you see them?" "Near the cliff path," Freddie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Last night, I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk. There was someone out there, watching the house. I couldn't see their face, but they moved like they didn't want to be seen." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "Merci, mademoiselle, you have been most helpful, but I advise caution. The shadows, they may be more dangerous than you know." As they walked away, Hastings muttered, "She's hiding something, Poirot. That story about shadows sounds like she's trying to deflect. Suspicion, perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Or perhaps she has seen the hunter stalking its prey. We must visit the library again. The cocaine, it is a clue, but the library, it is the stage." The library at End House was a cavern of shadows, its high shelves lined with dusty tomes and forgotten relics. The air was thick with the musty scent of old paper, and the single window, framed by heavy drapes, let in only a sliver of light. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame darting between shelves as he examined the carved wooden box where the cocaine had been found. It was an ornate piece, inlaid with mother of pearl, its lid engraved with a swirling pattern that seemed to pulse in the dim light. "Curious, Hastings," Poirot said, holding the box aloft. "This is no ordinary trinket. It is old, valuable, and deliberately placed. The cocaine inside was meant to be found, or perhaps not. A distraction, a message, or a mistake. Hastings peered over his shoulder. It's a fine piece, I'll give you that. But why hide drugs in it? And who? Charles, perhaps. Freddie mentioned he's been poking around in here. Before Poirot could respond, a sharp crack shattered the silence. The window exploded inward, glass shards scattering across the floor. A heavy stone thudded onto the carpet, wrapped in a crumpled piece of paper. Hastings dove for cover, his heart pounding, while Poirot, unruffled, knelt to retrieve the stone. He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the scrawled words, "Leave End House, or the next one kills." "Good heavens, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed, brushing glass from his sleeve. "That was no accident. Someone's out there, watching us." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Oui, mon ami." The killer grows bold or desperate. This note, it is crude, but it tells us much. The hand that wrote it trembles with fear or rage. And the stone, it came from the cliff path, I wager. Hastings glanced at the shattered window, his face pale. "You think it's the same person Freddie saw last night? The shadow on the cliff?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, tucking the note into his pocket. "Or perhaps it is a new player in this deadly game. We must speak with Inspector Japp. He has been investigating a smuggling ring in St. Louis, and this cocaine may be the link we seek." Inspector Japp was waiting at the police station, his burly frame hunched over a desk cluttered with papers. His mustache bristled as he looked up, his eyes narrowing at Poirot's approach. "Well, Poirot, you've stirred up a hornet's nest with this cocaine business. I've got men combing the cliffs for clues, but this smuggling ring, slippery as an eel. They've been moving contraband through St. Louis for months, and that cocaine you found matches their stock." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the players in this ring, Inspector, do they include any of Mademoiselle Nix?" "Circle." Japp leaned back, his chair creaking. "That's the rub. We've got a lead on a fellow named Lazarus Jim. Lazarus, a dealer who's been seen in St. Louis. Word is, he's got connections to someone at End House. Could be the Crofts, with their dodgy Australian stories, or maybe Charles Vyse, been spotted in some shady pubs down by the docks." "Charles Vyse," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. The quiet cousin, always in the background. "Tell me, Inspector, what do you know of his finances?" Japp shrugged. "He's a solicitor, handles Nick's affairs, but I've heard whispers he's in debt gambling maybe, or bad investments. If he's tied to this smuggling ring, it could explain a lot." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "And the cocaine, Inspector, it was pure. Not cut with other substances. Pure as snow," Japp said, grimacing. "Expensive stuff, too. Whoever hid it in that box wasn't planning to use it themselves. It's leverage, maybe, or a payoff." As they left the station, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the sea. Hastings shivered, pulling his coat tighter. "This is getting out of hand, Poirot. Smuggling, cocaine, stones through windows. Where does it end?" "It ends, mon ami, when we unmask the killer," Poirot said, his voice steady. "The cocaine is a clue, but it is not the whole story. We must return to End House and confront Monsieur Vyse. His secrets, they are beginning to unravel." Back at End House, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Charles Vyse was in the study, his lean frame bent over a stack of legal documents. His pale face tightened as Poirot and Hastings entered, his eyes flickering with something that might have been fear or defiance. "Monsieur Vyse," Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild. "We have questions about the library, and about a certain box containing cocaine. You frequent that room, do you not?" Charles's pen froze, ink blotting the paper. "Cocaine, in the library? I don't know what you're talking about, Poirot. I'm a solicitor, not a drug peddler." "And yet," Poirot said, stepping closer, "you have been seen in places most unsavory, pubs by the docks, where men like Jim Lazarus do business, and your finances, Monsieur Viste, are not as secure as one might expect." Charles's face flushed, his hands clenching. "You've been spying on me. That's outrageous." "Yes, I've had some financial troubles, but I'm not involved in any smuggling. And as for the library, I go there to work on Nick's estate papers. That's all." Poirot's eyes narrowed, and the shadows on the cliff path, the stone through the window. "These two are unrelated to you." Charles stood, his chair scraping the floor. "I don't know what you're implying, but I won't stand for it. If you've got accusations, make them plain. Before Poirot could respond, a scream pierced the air, echoing from the garden. They rushed outside to find Maggie, Nick's cousin, standing by the cliff path, her face ashen. "I saw it again," she cried, pointing toward the cliffs. A figure, moving in the shadows. It was holding something, maybe a gun. Poirot's gaze followed her trembling finger, his mind racing. The cocaine, the smuggling ring, the stone. The shadows all were threads in a web, and at its center was Endhouse. But who was the spider, and who the prey? As night fell, the wind howled, rattling the windows of Endhouse. Poirot stood alone, in the library, the carved box in his hands, its secrets whispering of betrayal and greed. The killer was close, their desperation palpable in the air. Tomorrow, Nick's masquerade ball would bring all the players together under one roof, a perfect stage for a murderer to strike. Poirot's grey cells hummed, piecing together the puzzle, but one question burned brightest. Is the cocaine a red herring, or is it tied to the attempts on Nick's life?